Home buyers across Canada are confronted by two massive obstacles that they must work through as they try to buy and finance a home. First, families are struggling with the devastating impact of the Liberal government's economic mismanagement and its housing plans. To great fanfare, this government announced Canada's National Housing Strategy in 2017 to make housing, they said, more affordable and accessible. It has been an obvious and utter failure. Canada's home prices have doubled since 2015, and today the average home price in this country is an eye-popping $800,000. Ask any recent buyer or aspiring buyer if they are better off today than they were 8 years ago, and the answer is a resounding, emphatic no. The second obstacle is the cost of financing a home, which has skyrocketed. Thanks to the Liberal government's massive deficit spending, Canada's debt has doubled to $1.2 trillion. On top of that, the interest rates to service that debt has skyrocketed and will soon hit $50 billion every single year. And the indirect cost of that debt is significant. Reckless spending has fueled inflation to levels Canadians haven't seen in 40 years, and this has driven up interest costs. The results? Higher mortgage payments. Today, the average mortgage payment in this country has doubled to $3,000 a month. And these two factors have made home ownership more expensive and pushed it out of reach to countless of Canadians, particularly young Canadians. And the lack of housing and higher costs has also been ruinous to home and apartment rentals. The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Canada's 10 biggest cities is now $2,213 compared to $1,170 before Canada's Liberals broke the housing market. Vancouver and Toronto are now the 3rd and 10th most unaffordable cities in the world, outstripping even places like New York and London. Big city governments that delay permits and have excess red tape and taxes can add as much as $200,000 to the cost of each new home built in this country. No wonder people can't afford to buy a home with prices like this being driven up by the gatekeepers. Now, owning a home and raising a family are the foundation of the Canadian dream. And yet, for many, this dream appears to be slipping further and further away. It is out of reach because these Liberals are out of touch. Home ownership has become an impossibility for too many Canadians since the Liberals first took office. In Canada, it's considered affordable to buy a home if the cost is less than 30% of a household's before-tax income. It now takes 60% of Canadians' income to cover the cost of owning a home. Those who have scrimped and saved for years to afford their first home now find themselves questioning if they can ever achieve the Canadian dream. This crisis did not happen overnight. It has steadily worsened every year the Liberals have been in office. People were led to believe, the Bank of Canada's governor, as well as the finance minister, that interest rates would remain low. Today, thousands of Canadians are grappling with the stark reality that those entrusted with governing and overseeing the nation's finances failed. The Canadian dream was once a straightforward proposition. Work hard and play by the rules. Finish school, get a decent job, get married, save each month for a down payment, have a family, and one day retire, owning your home. But for many of my constituents in New Brunswick, those who have done everything right, this dream today is unattainable. That's no matter how hard families work or how much they save, the dream of home ownership is a mirage. The Liberals have failed to deliver affordable housing. And that was made abundantly clear in the Auditor General's report last November, which revealed that despite spending tens of billions of dollars, and these Liberals are great at rattling off program after program and the mounds of money they have spent, but despite that, when it comes to homelessness, the numbers keep rising. The departments responsible, Infrastructure Canada and Employment and Social Development Canada, failed to even adequately track, says the Auditor General, and instead relied on outdated national shelter data to assess the effectiveness of their programs. In fact, the government's numbers, even using numbers that the auditor said were less than reliable, indicates homelessness has increased nationally by 6.6% since 2018. We're talking tens and hundreds of thousands of people who no longer have homes. The Auditor General also underscored that the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation, or CMHC, which oversees the majority of the housing strategies under this government, has no idea who benefits from its initiatives. Low-income families are being priced out of the market by funding rental housing that is supposedly affordable, but proves to be unaffordable for working families. It's an absolute mess, Madam Speaker. Housing is one pillar of the Canadian dream, and the other is raising a family. Yet the high cost of living, driven by inflated housing prices, has further discouraged Canadians from the other joy of life, starting a family. The average household debt in Canada reached 183% of disposable income in 2022, limiting the financial freedom and security of many Canadians. The risk of homelessness is also going up because demand for homes has surpassed supply. New Brunswick's many affordable units were purchased in the last couple of years in my riding. This has forced people out as buyers either moved in or increased rents. Families have been forced to move elsewhere to work and live. This has had a twin impact on labor market, as small communities now can't keep young families that tend to be part of the economic foundation of these economies to provide work for businesses and themselves start small businesses. And it's not always by choice. This is happening because they're being priced right out of their neighborhoods. And for those who cannot move or find an affordable place to live, the result is sadly, frequently, homelessness. And this has a devastating impact on one's mental as well as personal safety. For the most vulnerable, those who are on the edge of poverty or trying to break this cycle, there are nowhere near enough shelter spaces, supportive housing for persons with addictions or disability, rental units, or even starter homes. It is imperative that we address the housing crisis at its core by scaling up and building more. No government program is going to solve this problem. We need to build homes for future families. The Liberals cannot, Conservatives will get it done. The CMHC has noted, as of April 27, 2023, the housing shortage throughout Canada is going to worsen. The agency has predicted that there will be a 32% decline in home building this year, as the cost of borrowing remains high and building costs have risen by 20% in the past year alone. How's your carbon tax working now? We said it was a tax on everything, and it is, and it's driving up the cost of living in this country, especially on new homes, and it's Canadians, despite this government insisting they're doing everything right, that are paying the price. A Conservative government will incentivize home construction across Canada. Step one to fixing Canada's affordability crisis is restoring credibility to Ottawa's budgets. We will restore the federal government's finances, which have contributed to inflation and higher interest rates on home buyers. We will impose penalties on big city gatekeepers for excessive obstruction of housing projects. We will require cities seeking federal funds to pre-approve zoning for high-density housing and employment on land surrounding transit stations and hubs. Lastly, we will sell off at least 15% of underutilized federal buildings and its property to ensure these buildings become affordable housing for families. We must make the dream of home ownership a reality for families again. This is the only way we can secure a brighter future for our nations, for our children, and for the next generation.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacombe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I certainly appreciated the speech of my honourable colleague. I'm just not sure what side of the fence he's on, because on one hand he wants the government to take more action, the federal government, and on the other hand I believe, as a Conservative, would agree that it's market forces that determine a lot of housing affordability, and it is individuals, Canadians, companies, and so on that build housing. So I'd just like to ask my colleague if he agrees with his colleagues, such as the Member of Parliament for Mission, Mascouy-Fraser Canyon, and the Member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry, who have said that the government should do less on housing and pull back from its investments in the National Housing Strategy.
Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm not sure the member was listening to my speech. Nowhere did I say the government ought to spend more and do more. If anything, the government's spending is one of the reasons why inflation has been on fire in this country and home ownership is more difficult. So I'm not sure where that criticism came from, or the belief that I think they're doing not enough. They're actually going in the wrong direction. And so when it comes to the markets, well, the federal government, has the most responsibility to setting the conditions for economic growth and home construction. It has failed utterly, but the problem is they don't recognize they're going in the wrong direction, and that's why we need a new direction under Conservatives.
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Le 25 avril dernier, la députée conservatrice de Battleford Lloydminster a dit en Chambre, et je cite, « J'ai déjà mentionné dans cette enceinte que je respecte les compétences des provinces. Je pense en fait qu'elles sont les mieux placées que le gouvernement fédéral pour savoir ce qui fonctionne pour elles. Je respecte les compétences provinciales et que les provinces sont les mieux placées pour connaître les besoins de leurs habitants. » Madame la Présidente, le sujet du débat était le logement. Alors, étant donné qu'on a décidé du côté des conservateurs de proposer une motion de type « Ottawa knows best », qui impose des conditions aux provinces, est-ce que le collègue pense que la députée de Battleford Lloydminster va être mal à l'aise de voter en faveur de la motion conservatrice?
Et voilà. The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mais écoute, j'ai aucune idée. On devrait poser cette question aux membres. Moi je suis ici pour soutenir cette motion avec les autres membres conservateurs, et moi je suis prêt à faire ça. Merci.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
I, of course, live in Vancouver, which I think is the epicenter for the housing crisis, not only in this country, but frankly around the world. And I think it's fair to say that it is indeed a crisis. Housing anchors us in our communities. It is not just a commodity that can be traded and purchased and sold. It's an absolute necessity. It's how people, anchor themselves for work, and their children go to schools, and people connect to community. And of course, this has been in crisis for many years. And I was just curious to put this to my honourable colleague. To hear him speak, you would think that the housing crisis in Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, began in 2015. Well, I can tell him most assuredly it did not. It started back in the early 1990s. When the government of Brian Mulroney actually cancelled the federal government's participation in the National Housing Program, and of course the Liberals promised to restore it and didn't. So we've really had an absent federal partner for many decades. I'm just wondering if he acknowledges that, and could tell us what specifically he would do to make sure that we can build affordable housing, truly affordable housing, not just rely on market supply, but what he thinks the federal government could do to make sure that people can get access to social or affordable housing.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you. So two points I'd like to respond to from my honourable member. First of all, that is what makes this problem so infuriating. What began as an issue primarily for first Vancouver, Toronto, has now spread across the country. Even the smallest communities in my riding on the East Coast, places with populations of 6,000, 8,000 people, are experiencing homeless problems, a lack of affordable housing, and huge price increases. So this has been growing. I recognize that, but what is fundamental to understand is how much worse it has gotten over the last 8 years, with home prices doubling across the country. So it's a tough file, there's no doubt about it, but it has gotten so much worse under a government that is doing everything wrong. Now, where I disagree with my honourable colleague is that the NDP views the housing stock as static, as fixed, and we have to try to control and regulate it. Our view on this side is that we need to expand the stock of homes to expand it for everyone.